My goodness. What is the point of hinting at a deadline or putting a deadline out there, making these claims that you're going to start losing preseason games? You're going to start losing parts of training camp. If you're not going to follow through, then you've got absolutely no power. Zero power.
Listen to that. Zero power. And he's right. Because everything happening in these CBA negotiations right now tells you one thing and one thing only. The WNBA knows exactly who butters their bread, and every single move they're making is designed around one player. Not the union. Not the veterans. Not the collective. One player. Caitlin Clark. And if you can't see that by now, you're not paying attention. You are willfully blind to the most obvious power play in the history of women's professional sports. Let's rewind to what just happened. The WNBA and the Players Union have been locked in negotiations for months. Months. And every single deadline that's been set has come and gone like it meant nothing. The union hinted they'd hold out through preseason. They hinted they'd disrupt training camp. They hinted at a work stoppage. And what happened? Absolutely nothing. They blinked. Every single time they blinked. They blinked because blinking was the only option they actually had. Because the union knows something that the veterans don't want to admit out loud. The leverage in this negotiation doesn't belong to the players as a group. It belongs to the league. And the reason the league has all the leverage can be summed up in 2 words. Caitlin Clark. Think about what the WNBA looked like before she showed up. Go back and actually think about it. Average attendance was scraping the bottom. Television ratings were an afterthought. Sponsors were throwing pocket change at the league like they were doing charity work. Revenue was so low that the league was losing money year after year after year. $10 million a year in losses. Players were making $120,000 on average and supplementing their income playing overseas just to make ends meet. The WNBA wasn't growing. It was surviving. Barely. It was a league on life support pretending to be healthy. And then Caitlin Clark declared for the draft, and everything changed overnight. Not gradually. Not over a few seasons. Overnight. Attendance records shattered. Television deals got renegotiated. Merchandise sales exploded. Corporate sponsors who wouldn't return phone calls 3 years ago were suddenly lining up with checkbooks open. For the first time in the league's history, revenue-sharing checks actually went out to players. $8 million. That's the number. $8 million in revenue sharing from the 2025 season alone. And here's the part that makes this whole negotiation so fascinating and so uncomfortable. Clark only played half that season because she was still finishing college. Half a season. Let me say that again. Half a season. And she generated enough revenue to trigger the first revenue-sharing payout in league history. Let that sit for a second. Let it really marinate. Every veteran who's been in this league for 8, 10, 12 years, grinding through empty arenas and cable access television deals, playing in front of crowds that wouldn't fill a high school gymnasium, never generated enough collective revenue to trigger a single revenue-sharing check, all of them combined. Every roster, every team, every season for 27 years. Nothing. One rookie played half a season and the check started flowing. If that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about who holds the power in this situation, nothing will. If you're finding value in this breakdown, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Trust me, this gets a lot more intense. Now let's talk about what the league did with that information. Because this is where it gets ruthless. The WNBA looked at their revenue data, looked at their ratings data, looked at their attendance data, and they built a CBA proposal specifically designed to reward the players who are driving that growth. Not the collective. Not the veterans who built the foundation. The specific players who are moving the needle right now. And guess who sits at the very top of that list? The proposal allows young stars on rookie contracts who make first or second team All-League to access maximum salary contracts years earlier than the current system allows. We're talking 2027 for Clark, 2028 for Paige Bueckers, this year for Aaliyah Boston. Maximum contracts worth $1.3 million. Under the old system, these players would have had to wait until their second or third contract to reach that level. The league is fast-tracking them. And the reason they're fast-tracking them is because those are the players generating the revenue that's funding this entire negotiation.
And I got to be honest with you, outside of Caitlin Clark, would you guys miss, really and truly, most any of these other players? Would you lose a solitary millisecond of sleep? My gut feeling is you wouldn't. You wouldn't.
That's the uncomfortable truth that nobody in the union wants to say out loud. The WNBA's explosion in popularity isn't a collective achievement. It's not because the overall quality of play improved. It's not because veterans suddenly started playing better basketball. It's because specific players, primarily one specific player, brought an audience that didn't exist before. And the league is building their entire financial future around keeping that audience engaged. Now here's where it gets really interesting and really messy. The veterans in this league, the ones who played through the lean years, who took flights on Spirit Airlines and stayed in hotels that wouldn't pass a health inspection, they're watching this happen in real time. They're watching the league craft an offer that specifically benefits the players who just got here while treating everyone else as interchangeable parts who benefit from the rising tide. And they're furious. They should be furious. But they're also trapped.
These players should have signed a deal 3 months ago. The moment they hit a $500,000 on average salary, boom, they should have signed that deal and got on with it. So no sympathy for the players here whatsoever.
He's not wrong. The average salary in this new CBA jumps from $120,000 to $540,000 in year one. Year one. That's a 450% increase. The salary cap goes from $1.5 million to $5.75 million. Maximum salaries go from $249,000 to $1.3 million. These aren't incremental improvements. This is a complete transformation of the financial structure of women's professional basketball. And the players are sitting here arguing about housing.
Like we're a bunch of teenagers that left the house going to a dorm. Y'all are the average player's going to make over $500,000. Y'all worried about some housing. God, the regular citizen walking the planet could be so lucky.
Housing. They want housing paid for. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. The league is offering you 5 times your current salary. Revenue sharing checks that just paid out $8 million in their first year. Maximum contracts worth over $1 million. And you're holding up the entire negotiation because you want somebody else to pay your rent. You're about to make $540,000 a year and you need the league to cover your 2-bedroom apartment? Come on. Come on. The entitlement net demand is staggering. Every single person watching this right now would trade their current salary for $540,000 and gladly figure out their own housing situation. You know what most people making $540,000 a year have to worry about? Taxes. That's it. They're not calling their employer asking for a housing stipend. They're calling a real estate agent. That these players have been coddled by a system that treated them like they were doing the league a favor by showing up. And now they can't let go of that mentality even when the money is screaming at them to grow up. The league even tried to compromise on this. They offered to keep paying housing for rookies and minimum salary players. The veterans making near max money, you're on your own. And that's somehow controversial. That's somehow a sticking point worth blowing up the entire season over. It's madness. And here's what makes the housing fight even more insulting. While these players are arguing about who pays their rent, Caitlin Clark is out there generating the revenue that's making all of this possible. She's not in the negotiation room demanding a housing allowance. She's on the court creating the economic conditions that allow the WNBA to even have a conversation about $500,000 average salaries. The disconnect between what the players are fighting for and what's actually driving their ability to fight for it is absolutely wild. But here's the hook that most people are missing in all of this. And it's the part that should terrify every veteran in the league. The league isn't just offering more money. They're offering a system that fundamentally restructures who has power in the WNBA. And that power flows directly to the players who generate revenue. Period. Full stop. No exceptions. Did you catch that? The league is taking care of the players they know are going to earn them actual money. Not the players who've been here the longest, Not the players who suffered through the hard years. Not the players who built the foundation. The players who make money. And right now, that list starts and ends with Caitlin Clark, extends to Paige Bueckers and Aaliyah Boston, and then drops off a cliff. That's the reality. The WNBA isn't building this CBA for 144 players. They're building it for about 5 players who happen to be worth building around, and everyone else gets to ride the wave those 5 players create. And this is where the union fracture becomes impossible to hide. Because how do you vote on this proposal as a collective when the proposal is specifically designed to benefit individuals? If you're Caitlin Clark, this deal is incredible. You're looking at a max contract in 2027 worth $1.3 million, plus revenue-sharing bonuses that could add another $150,000 on top of that. You're 24 years old, and you're about to become a millionaire playing basketball in a league that couldn't give away tickets 5 years ago. Why would you ever vote against this? There's no universe where Caitlin Clark looks at this deal and says no. There's no universe where Paige Bueckers looks at this deal and says no. There's no universe where any young star who's actually moving the needle says no. But if you're a 9-year veteran making $300,000 under the new cap structure, watching a second-year player leapfrog you to a max contract because she happens to be the one filling arenas, how do you vote yes? How do you sit in that union meeting and raise your hand for a deal that explicitly tells you that your years of service matter less than someone else's Instagram following? How do you go back to your locker room and pretend everything's fine when the player next to you is making 4 times your salary because she went viral during March Madness? The league knew this tension existed. They didn't just know it. They weaponized it.
God, rest in peace, David Stern. If David Stern was involved here, there'd be locks on the door already. He wouldn't have played at all.
And that reference to David Stern is telling, because what the WNBA is doing right now is straight out of the NBA playbook from the 2011 lockout. You create an offer that's generous enough overall that it's impossible to reject publicly, but you structure the specifics so that the players who matter most to your business model get disproportionately rewarded. Then you sit back and watch the union argue with itself. You don't have to break the union. You just have to make the union's most valuable members realize that their interests don't align with the collective's interests. And once that realization hits, solidarity evaporates. That's exactly what's happening right now. The language coming out of the union has completely shifted. A few weeks ago, they were demanding 50% of gross revenue. Now they've dropped to 26% of gross in their counteroffer. The league is holding firm at 70% of net revenue. And Kelsey Plum, the vice president of the union, is out here talking about focusing on the game and not the gap. That's not the language of a union preparing for war. That's the language of a union that's already lost the war and is trying to figure out how to surrender gracefully.
And now another deadline, which was supposed to be today, has come and gone. Nothing. Nothing.
Every missed deadline is another crack in the foundation of the union's negotiating position. Every marathon session that ends at 3 a.m. with no deal is another day closer to the season, another day where the league's leverage grows and the players' leverage shrinks. Because here's what the union doesn't want to acknowledge. The league can survive without a season. It would hurt, but they'd survive. The media deals are signed. The expansion fees are collected. The franchise values keep climbing regardless. But the players? The players can't survive without game checks, especially the veterans who don't have overseas contracts lined up, who don't have endorsement deals, who don't have Caitlin Clark's Nike money to fall back on. Every day without a deal is a day where the financial pressure falls harder on the players who can least afford it. And those are the same players the league's offer doesn't specifically benefit. It's a vice grip, and it's tightening.
If the commissioner doesn't know whether or not the training camp's getting moved, who the hell's got the answer to that? Nobody.
Good question. And the answer is, nobody needs to have the answer because the league doesn't care. They have adopted the NFL playbook, and they're running it to perfection. Lose training camp? Fine. Shorten preseason? Fine. Hit the ground running with players who haven't had a proper camp? That's the players' problem, not the league's. The league gets the same media money, whether training camp is 3 weeks or 3 days. The broadcast contracts don't have a clause that says the checks get smaller if the basketball is sloppy in week 1. The players are the ones who suffer when the product gets worse. And the product will get worse without proper preparation. We've already seen what happens. But here's the thing: the league understands that the union doesn't. The product quality doesn't matter nearly as much as the product's star power. Nobody's tuning in to watch fundamentally sound basketball. They're not watching for the perfect pick-and-roll execution or the textbook defensive rotations. They're tuning in to watch Caitlin Clark. They're tuning in to see Paige Bueckers. They're tuning in for the drama, the storylines, the individual brilliance that makes you stop scrolling on your phone and actually pay attention. And those stars are going to show up regardless of how long training camp lasts. Caitlin Clark doesn't need 3 weeks of practice to draw 3 million viewers. She just needs to step on the court.
After watching World Cup qualifying basketball, because look, that's W players out there playing, and outside of Caitlin Clark, they look like crap. They need all the training camp they can get.
That is brutal. But watch the tape and tell me he's wrong. Go ahead, I'll wait. The World Cup qualifying games were supposed to showcase the depth of American women's basketball. They were supposed to prove that the WNBA's growth was about the league as a whole, not just one player. Instead, they showcased exactly how dependent the entire operation is on one player. When Clark was on the floor, the offense moved, the crowd engaged, the broadcast had energy, the camera work got better, the commentary got sharper. The whole production elevated because the audience was actually paying attention. When she wasn't on the floor, it looked like exactly what the WNBA looked like for the previous 27 years. Competent, technically sound, and completely unwatchable for a mainstream audience. The ratings tell that story better than I ever could. And that's the core truth that this entire CBA negotiation orbits around like a planet around the sun. It's the gravitational center of everything. Without Caitlin Clark, the WNBA is nothing. I don't mean that as disrespect to the athletes. They're incredible basketball players. They've dedicated their lives to their craft. They deserve compensation and respect. But deserve and generate are two very different words. And in a negotiation, the only word that matters is generate. The veterans deserve more money. They built this league from nothing. They played through conditions that would make most professional athletes quit on the spot. They kept the WNBA alive when no one was watching. All of that is true. But none of it generated the revenue that's funding this new CBA. One player did that, and the league is making sure everyone knows it. So what happens next? The deal gets done. It gets done because the money is too good to walk away from. $540,000 average salary, $1.3 million max contracts, $8 million in revenue sharing that's only going to grow as the league expands and the media deals get bigger. The veterans will swallow their pride because the alternative is a work stoppage that hurts them more than anyone else. The young stars will vote yes because the deal was literally written for them, and the union will issue a statement about how this is a historic agreement that benefits all players. But behind the press conference smiles and the carefully worded statements, everyone will know the truth. This CBA isn't built on collective bargaining. It's built on individual value. And in the WNBA, individual value has a name, a number, and a ponytail. The league didn't negotiate with a union. They negotiated around a union, using the economic reality of who actually drives their business to make the collective bargaining process irrelevant. They showed the players the revenue-sharing checks. They showed them the projections for 2026 and 2027. They showed them what happens when Caitlin Clark plays a full season and the expansion teams launch and the new media deals kick in. And they said, you can have all of this, or you can fight us and risk losing it. The players chose the money. They always choose the money. Because at the end of the day, solidarity doesn't pay the mortgage. Solidarity doesn't fund your retirement. Solidarity doesn't make up for the years you spent making $120,000 while playing in front of 3,000 people. The money does. And the money is here now because of one player. And the league just made damn sure everyone knows it. The WNBA without Caitlin Clark is a league that loses money, plays in half-empty arenas, and negotiates CBAs worth a fraction of what's on the table right now. The WNBA, with Caitlin Clark, is a league that pays out $8 million in revenue sharing, offers max contracts worth $1.3 million, and has owners actually investing in their franchises for the first time. That's not opinion. That's the math. That's the business. That's the reality that every player in that union meeting knows in their gut, even if they'll never say it into a microphone. So when this deal gets signed, and it will, remember what actually happened here. The league used one player's economic impact to restructure an entire league's financial system. They used that player's value to fracture a union's negotiating position. They used the promise of future revenue primarily driven by that one player, to get 144 women to accept terms that overwhelmingly favor the few over the many. And then they'll call it progress. And maybe it is progress. The money is real. The salary increases are historic. The revenue sharing is unprecedented. But progress for whom? Progress built on what foundation? Progress that survives if Caitlin Clark tears an ACL, decides to retire early, or simply stops being the cultural phenomenon she is right now? That's the question nobody wants to ask. Because the answer reveals everything about how fragile this entire boom really is. The WNBA isn't having a moment. Caitlin Clark is having a moment, and the league is smart enough to build a CBA around that reality instead of pretending otherwise. They looked at 27 years of data that said the collective approach wasn't working, and they made the most logical business decision imaginable. Bet on the individual who actually moves the needle. The players who benefit from that reality will call it fair. The players who don't will call it something else entirely. And the rest of us will watch and wonder how long a league built around one player can sustain a financial structure designed for the many. Let me put it this way. If Caitlin Clark announced tomorrow that she was retiring to go play professional golf, or start a media company, or just sit on a beach somewhere, what happens to these negotiations? You think the league is still offering a $5.75 million salary cap? You think max contracts are still at $1.3 million? You think that $8 million revenue sharing pool exists next year? Be honest with yourself. The entire financial foundation of this CBA is built on the assumption that Caitlin Clark continues to play basketball in the WNBA and continues to draw the audience she draws. Remove that assumption and the numbers collapse. And every single person in that negotiation room knows it, even if they'll never admit it publicly. This deal gets done within weeks. The season starts on time or close to on time. The salaries go up. The revenue sharing grows. And everybody moves forward pretending that this was always the plan, that the growth was always coming, that the money was always going to be there regardless. But you and I know the truth. We watched it happen in real time. We saw who filled those arenas. We saw who moved those ratings. We saw who triggered those revenue-sharing checks. We saw who made corporate sponsors suddenly care about women's basketball after ignoring it for nearly 3 decades. And we saw a league build an entire collective bargaining agreement around that one undeniable, uncomfortable, beautiful truth. Without Caitlin Clark, the WNBA is nothing. And these negotiations just proved it. Drop your take in the comments. Do the veterans have a right to be angry? Or is this just the business of sports playing out exactly the way it always does? Should the league reward loyalty or revenue? Because this conversation is far from over, and the fractures the CBA created are going to define this league for the next decade. Maybe longer. And the veterans who got left behind in this deal are going to remember exactly how it felt to watch someone else's value determine their future.